The crystal flutes at Ethelgard, perched 60 floors above the glittering expanse of Manhattan, chimed with a sound clearer and more expensive than any bell Anya Petrova had ever heard. At 22, she had become an expert in the subtle symphony of wealth, the whisper of bespoke wool, the soft click of a platinum watch clasp, the confident murmur of men who moved markets with a single phone call. Anya moved between them, a ghost in a starched black uniform, her worn-out sneakers a silent rebellion against the marble floors that reflected a life she could only serve, never possess. She had come to New York 5 years ago with her grandmother, Elena, leaving behind a world that had crumbled with the Soviet Union and a small Ukrainian village that now existed only in her babushka's fading stories. They lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, where the scent of borscht and dill clung to the curtains, a world away from the truffle oil and vintage champagne that perfumed the air at Ethelgard. Anya's life was a carefully balanced equation of rent, her grandmother's medications, and the small amount she tried to save for a future that felt as distant as the stars outside the restaurant's panoramic windows. "Table 7, Anya." "The Crofts," whispered Maria. The head waitress, a weary but kind woman who saw the exhaustion behind Anya's professional smile. "Be sharp. The old woman is Eleanor Vance. She complains if the ice melts too quickly." Anya's stomach tightened. Everyone knew the Croft Vance dynasty. Eleanor Vance was old New York money, a formidable matriarch whose family had owned half of the Upper East Side since the Gilded Age. Her late daughter, Isabella, had shocked society by marrying Julian Croft, a self-made tech billionaire whose fortune, while vast, was considered vulgar and new by the city's elite. Now Julian Croft sat at the table, a man whose raw energy seemed contained by his tailored suit, his grief for his wife, lost to cancer 3 years prior, still a palpable shadow in his eyes. Beside him was his daughter, Lily, a girl of Anya's age with the same gentle eyes as her late mother, looking pale and distressed. And at the head of the table, reigning like a queen in exile, was Eleanor Vance, her face a mask of aristocratic disapproval. Anya approached with a pitcher of iced water, her movements fluid and unobtrusive. She filled their glasses, her focus absolute, trying to block out their tense conversation. "It's simply unacceptable." Eleanor's voice was like ice shards. "The wedding is Saturday. 48 hours. To have the veil returned in this state, it's a catastrophe." "Mother Vance, please." Julian Croft's voice was a low rumble, strained with forced patience. The restoration specialist said the fire at their studio was a freak accident. They saved most of it, but the main panel is everything, Eleanor snapped. The Serebriansky bridal blessing. It has been worn by every Vance bride for 200 years. It cannot be replicated. Madame Dubois, the only artisan in Paris who knew the technique, passed away a decade ago. It's ruined. Lily's wedding is ruined. Lily, the bride-to-be, finally broke her silence, her voice trembling. "Grandmother, please. It's just a piece of fabric." "It is not just a piece of fabric, Lillian," Eleanor retorted, her voice dripping with condescension. "It is our heritage. It is who we are. Something your father, for all his success, has never quite understood." Julian Croft's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his gaze fixed on his distraught daughter. Anya froze, her hand hovering over the water pitcher. Serebriansky. The word struck her like a physical blow, a name she hadn't heard spoken outside the walls of her Queen's apartment in years. It was the name of her grandmother's village, a place erased from most maps, a place known for one thing, a unique, almost magical style of embroidery, So intricate, it was said the women wove prayers into the threads. Every evening of her childhood, Anya had sat at her grandmother's feet, a needle in her small hands, learning the ancient stitches. Her babushka's own hands, now gnarled with arthritis, had once moved with impossible speed and precision, creating patterns of breathtaking complexity. "This is not just sewing, Agnieszka," Elena would say, her voice a soft murmur. "This is our story. Each knot is a memory. Each flower is a hope. The Serebriansky patterns are our soul, passed from mother to daughter, when all else was taken from us." Anya's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel the stares of the other staff, the unspoken rule screaming in her mind. "You are invisible. You are silent. You do not exist." But as she looked at Lily's tear-streaked face, she saw not a billionaire's daughter, but a girl about to be married without a piece of her mother she desperately needed. Before she could reason herself out of it, before the years of trained subservience could reassert control, the words tumbled out of her mouth, a quiet but clear intrusion into the bubble of wealth and despair. "Excuse me." 3 pairs of eyes snapped towards her. Julian Croft's were sharp and assessing. Lily's were wide with surprise. Eleanor Vance's were narrowed with pure, unadulterated fury. "I beg your pardon," Eleanor said, her voice dangerously low. "Did you just interrupt a private conversation?" Anya's cheeks burned. "My deepest apologies, ma'am. I couldn't help but overhear. You mentioned Serebriansky embroidery." Julian Croft leaned forward, a flicker of genuine curiosity cutting through his frustration. "What about it?" "I know it," Anya whispered, the confession feeling as momentous as revealing a state secret. "My grandmother. She is from Serebriansky. She taught me." A harsh, disbelieving laugh escaped Eleanor's lips. "You? A waitress? You claim to know a master craft that has been all but lost for a generation? Don't be absurd. You probably saw the name on a fashion blog. Go fetch more bread." "No, wait," Julian said, holding up a hand to silence his mother-in-law. He studied Anya, his gaze intense, searching. "You're serious?" Anya straightened her spine, channeling a fraction of her grandmother's indomitable spirit. "Yes, sir. My grandmother is Elena Petrova. She taught me the old ways, the patterns, the specific knots, the way you must use a silver-spun thread for the blessing stitch, a thread that looks grey until it catches the light." At the mention of the silver-spun thread, a detail known only to those intimately familiar with the craft, Julian Croft's expression shifted. The skepticism in his eyes was replaced by something else, something akin to shock. Eleanor, for her part, fell silent, her mouth a thin, hard line. "My wife, Isabella," Julian said slowly, his voice dropping. "She tried to learn. Her great-grandmother commissioned the original veil. Isabella had books, sketches. She mentioned the silver thread. She said it represented a tear of joy shed by an angel. My grandmother says it represents the resilience of our people," Anya said softly. "Something that looks plain, but holds a hidden light." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotions. Anya could feel the entire restaurant holding its breath, though no one else was paying them the slightest attention. Lily looked from Anya to her father, a fragile hope dawning on her face. "Let her try," Lily said, her voice stronger now. "Father, please. What do we have to lose? If she can't do it, we're in the same position we are now. But if she can—" "Don't be a fool, Lillian," Eleanor hissed. "This is a trick, a ploy for money from a clever little immigrant. She will ruin what's left of the veil." Julian Croft ignored her. His focus was entirely on Anya. He saw not just a waitress, but the desperation and sincerity in her young face. He was a man who had built an empire by betting on outsiders, on seeing potential where others saw nothing. But this was different. This wasn't about business. It was about his late wife's legacy. "What is your name?" he asked. "Anya Petrova, sir." He stood up, a decisive move that commanded the attention of the entire room. "Anya Petrova, my car will be waiting for you downstairs in 1 hour. You will go home, gather whatever materials you and your grandmother possess, and you will come to my estate in the Hamptons. You will not touch the veil tonight. First, you will prove to me, to us, that you are not just repeating words you've read in a book." His voice was not unkind, but it held the unyielding weight of his authority. "If you can do this, I will pay you more than you make in 5 years at this restaurant. If you are wasting my time, you will be lucky to keep this job." He dropped a black credit card on the table to cover the bill. "Don't be late." Without another word, the Crofts and a seething Eleanor Vance swept out of the restaurant, leaving Anya standing by the table, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had just gambled her entire life on a 200-year-old stitch, a whispered memory from a forgotten village, and she had no idea if she could win. The lock on their Queen's apartment door clicked open with a familiar, weary groan. Anya stepped inside, the scent of boiled potatoes and her grandmother's lavender soap washing over her, a comforting balm after the sterile opulence of Ethelgard. "Agnieszka!" Elena Petrova called from the small living room, where she sat in her favorite armchair, a worn Afghan draped over her lap. The television murmured in the background, but her attention was on the window, on the familiar rhythm of the neighborhood settling in for the night. "You are home early. Is everything well?" Anya sank onto the ottoman at her grandmother's feet, the adrenaline of the past hour giving way to a tidal wave of anxiety. "Babushka," she began, her voice trembling, "I think I have done something either very brave or very, very foolish." Elena switched off the television, her sharp blue eyes, still vibrant in her wrinkled face, focusing entirely on her granddaughter. "Tell me." The story poured out of Anya, the magnificent restaurant, the powerful family, the ruined wedding veil, and the impossible name spoken aloud, Serebriansky. As she spoke, she watched her grandmother's expression shift from gentle concern to astonishment, and then to a deep, resonant sorrow. "Croft," Elena whispered, testing the name on her tongue, and his wife was Isabella Vance, her great-grandmother. That would have been Althea Vance. I remember the stories. She traveled through our region before the First Great War. A wealthy American, obsessed with local crafts. She commissioned the most elaborate bridal blessing my great-aunt had ever made. It took a year to complete. The village spoke of it for decades. "Babushka, they want me to repair it," Anya said, the reality of the task crashing down on her. "The wedding is in 2 days. I have to go to their home tonight to prove I can do it. But I've never worked on something so old. My hands, they are for serving coffee and clearing plates. What if I am not good enough? What if I destroy it?" Elena's gnarled hand, twisted by years of hard work and the creeping pain of arthritis, came to rest on Anya's head. "Your hands carry the skill of our bloodline, child. They are not the hands of a servant. They are the hands of an artist." With a determined grunt, Elena pushed herself out of the armchair and shuffled towards the bedroom. "Come, there is no time for doubt." Anya followed her into the small, meticulously tidy room they shared. From the bottom of a large cedar chest that had made the journey from Ukraine with them, Elena retrieved a flat, velvet-wrapped parcel. It was an object Anya had seen, but was rarely allowed to touch. "My mother gave this to me when I married your grandfather," Elena said, her fingers fumbling with the silk ribbons. She said, "The world will try to make you forget who you are. This will help you remember." She unwrapped the velvet to reveal a worn leather portfolio. Inside, nestled between sheets of yellowed tissue paper, were not patterns, but dozens of small fabric swatches, each one showcasing a different Serebriansky stitch. And beneath them, a collection of tools that made Anya's breath catch. Antique needles made of polished bone, thimbles of chased silver, and most precious of all, several wooden bobbins wound with thread of impossible fineness. One bobbin held a shimmering, greyish filament. "The silver-spun silk," Anya whispered in awe. "From the last batch my mother ever made," Elena confirmed. "There is not much left in the world. This will be for the blessing stitch." She then pulled out a small, leather-bound book, its pages filled with her own elegant, spidery handwriting and detailed drawings. "I wrote down everything my mother taught me, every pattern, every secret. I feared it would die with me." She pressed the book into Anya's hands. "This is your inheritance, Agnieszka, more valuable than any billionaire's fortune." She turned to a page near the middle, showing the full, magnificent design of the bridal blessing. It was a dizzying tapestry of symbols Anya knew by heart: the twin doves of fidelity, the sunburst of prosperity, the river of life, all entwined with intricate floral motifs representing generations of family. "Look closely," Elena instructed, her finger tracing a complex knot. "This is the weaver's knot. It is the signature of our family. It looks simple, but it is tied from the back, locking the threads in a way no one can replicate without the knowledge. Madame Dubois in Paris, she was a fine artisan, but she was not of Serebriansky. Her work would not have this. If the original veil was made by my great-aunt, it will have this knot. You will look for it. It will be your proof." Anya studied the diagram, committing the intricate twist and pull to memory. It was a small detail, almost invisible to an untrained eye, but it was a key, a secret handshake across a century. "I'm scared, babushka." Elena cupped Anya's face in her hands, her touch surprisingly firm. "Fear is a cold companion. Leave it here with me. You will take our history with you instead. When you hold that needle, you are not Anya Petrova, the waitress. You are the granddaughter of Eleanor and the great-granddaughter of Sophia. You are a keeper of the light. Now, dress in something simple but respectable. And pack the tools. A master is nothing without her tools." An hour later, as Anya stood on the curb outside their brick apartment building, a sleek, black Escalade purred to a silent stop before her. The driver, a man in a crisp suit, stepped out and opened the rear door without a word. As she slid onto the plush leather seat, clutching the precious velvet parcel to her chest, Anya felt as though she was stepping into another dimension. The car moved silently through the city, leaving the familiar, noisy streets of Queens behind, crossing bridges and merging onto highways that led east, towards the fabled coastline of the Hamptons, towards a test that would either validate her entire history or shatter her future. The Croft estate was less a house and more a sovereign territory, carved out of the Hamptons shoreline. The Escalade swept through gates that opened with silent, electronic obedience, proceeding down a long driveway lined with perfectly sculpted oak trees. The main house rose before them, a modern marvel of glass, stone, and cedar that seemed to float above the dunes, the sound of the Atlantic Ocean, a constant, powerful whisper in the background. Anya was led not into a grand foyer, but into a quiet, gallery-like room with soaring ceilings and walls of glass that looked out onto the dark, churning sea. The space was dominated by a single large table upon which, Under the stark glow of an architect's lamp lay the veil. It was a masterpiece, a cascade of antique Brussels lace, so fine it looked like captured mist. But in the center there was a gaping, jagged hole, a brutal wound in its delicate beauty. The edges were singed, a testament to the fire that had nearly consumed it. Julian Croft stood beside the table, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up. Eleanor Vance was seated in a severe-looking armchair nearby, her arms crossed, her expression one of utter disdain. Lily was nowhere to be seen. "Miss Petrova," Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of the earlier urgency. He seemed more tired, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Thank you for coming." Eleanor sniffed audibly. "Theatricality is concluded. Let us see if there is any substance behind the little show at the restaurant." Julian ignored her. He gestured to a smaller table set up nearby. On it was a simple square of linen stretched taut in an embroidery hoop, along with a basket of modern silk threads. "Mrs. Vance has a test for you. This is a handkerchief embroidered by my wife's great-grandmother. It features a small part of the main pattern, the twin doves." He handed her the antique handkerchief. The work was exquisite, the tiny stitches creating a perfect, lifelike image. Replicate it. This was it. The audition. Anya took a deep breath, pushing away the tremor in her hands. She sat at the table, the velvet parcel on her lap. She didn't look at the modern threads in the basket. Instead, she unwrapped her own tools. She selected one of the antique bone needles. She chose a bobbin of silk thread from her grandmother's collection, its color a perfect match for the aged ivory of the original. The room was silent, except for the distant crash of waves as she threaded the needle, her movements precise and unhurried. She did not need to consult her grandmother's book for this pattern. She had stitched it 100 times as a child. Her fingers began to move, the needle dipping and rising through the linen with a practiced, rhythmic grace. She was no longer in a billionaire's sterile gallery. She was back in her grandmother's kitchen, the scent of yeast and the sound of Ukrainian folk songs in the air. She poured all her focus, all her memory, all her heritage into the tiny space of the embroidery hoop. The doves began to emerge, not as a flat image, but as a sculpture in thread, their feathers textured, their eyes seeming to hold a spark of life. She worked for nearly an hour, completely absorbed. When she finally tied off the last thread, she paused, her eyes still on her work. It was good. It was worthy. She looked up. Julian Croft was standing directly over her shoulder, his expression unreadable. Eleanor had risen from her chair and was watching from a few feet away, her skepticism warring with a dawning sense of disbelief. Anya took the hoop and placed it on the table next to the antique handkerchief. Julian picked up both pieces, holding them side by side under the bright lamp. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Anya's work was not just a copy. It was a mirror. The tension of the stitches, the subtle shading, the way the light caught the silk. It was a perfect echo of the original. "The stitches," Julian murmured, almost to himself. "They're identical." He then turned to the back of the fabric, examining the tiny, intricate knots. He looked from one to the other, his eyes widening slightly. He had seen his wife study the veil enough times to recognize the details. "How?" Eleanor's voice was a strained whisper. She snatched the pieces from Julian's hand, her own expert eye scrutinizing the work. She saw it too. The precision was impossible. "My grandmother taught me that the soul of the work is on the back," Anya said quietly. "The neatness of the knots, the way the threads are carried. That is the true sign of a Serebriansky artisan." Julian finally looked at Anya, and for the first time, she saw not a billionaire or a grieving husband, but a man seeing a genuine glimmer of hope. Isabella would have loved this. He turned to his mother-in-law. "Well, Eleanor, what is your verdict?" Eleanor Vance placed the handkerchief and the hoop back on the table, her movements stiff. She looked at Anya, her eyes cold as a winter sea. "She can copy a pattern. It proves nothing. The veil is a sacred object, not a student sampler. One mistake, and it is lost forever." "It is already lost if we do nothing," Julian countered, his patience finally snapping. "This is the only chance we have, the only one." He turned his back on Eleanor, his decision made. He looked at Anya, his voice softening. "Lily is upstairs. She was too overwrought to witness this. I will tell her the news. We have a guest suite prepared for you. You will start first thing in the morning. My personal assistant will arrange for anything you need." He paused, his gaze dropping to the velvet parcel in her lap. "Your grandmother. She must be a remarkable woman." "She is," Anya said, her voice thick with emotion. "Then you will do this work in honor of both your grandmother and my wife," Julian said. "No pressure." He offered a small, tired smile, and in that moment, Anya understood the immense weight he carried, the desire to give his daughter a perfect day, to honor the woman he loved, and to bridge the impossible chasm of grief. The weight of it all was now resting on Anya's shoulders, and on the strength of the tiny, silver-spun threads from a world that no longer existed. The sun rose over the Atlantic, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and gold. But Anya saw none of it. She had been working for hours in the glass-walled room, which had been transformed into a sanctuary of concentration. A comfortable chair had been provided, along with a tray of food and coffee she hadn't touched. Lily sat with her, a quiet, watchful presence, her earlier anxiety replaced by a reverent calm. The damaged veil was carefully mounted on a large, custom-made embroidery frame. Anya's first task had been the most terrifying, trimming away the scorched, unsalvageable lace and securing the fragile edges. Now, she was meticulously weaving in new threads, creating the foundation upon which the Serebriansky panel would be reborn. Her grandmother's tools felt like extensions of her own hands. The bone needles slid through the delicate fabric with ease. The antique threads, preserved for decades, were stronger and more lustrous than anything made today. As she worked, a quiet rhythm established itself, the dip and pull of the needle, the whisper of silk, the distant sigh of the ocean. "My mother used to do this," Lily said softly, breaking the long silence. "She had a room upstairs. Her nest, she called it. It was filled with fabrics and threads from all over the world. She'd sit by the window for hours. It was the only time she ever seemed completely at peace." "My grandmother says the needle quiets the mind," Anya replied, not looking up from her work. "She says you stitch your worries into the fabric, and it holds them for you, so you don't have to carry them." "Did she teach you all the patterns?" Lily asked, her voice full of wonder as she watched a complex floral motif begin to take shape under Anya's fingers. All the ones she remembered. Some were lost during the wars, when people had to flee with nothing. My babushka wrote down everything she could, so it wouldn't disappear forever. Anya paused, carefully executing a particularly difficult stitch. "This pattern, the bridal blessing, it's the most important one. It's not just for beauty. Each element is a prayer for the bride." "Tell me," Lily urged, leaning closer. "The doves you saw on the handkerchief, they are for fidelity and partnership," Anya explained, her voice taking on the melodic, storytelling cadence of her grandmother. This sunburst I am starting now, it is for a life of warmth and prosperity. The river that will flow around it represents a long and continuous life, one that overcomes obstacles like water flowing around stones. And the flowers, each one represents an ancestor, a matriarch of the family, watching over the bride. It connects her to all the women who came before. Lily's eyes filled with tears. So, my mother, she will be there, in the veil. Anya met the young bride's gaze, her heart aching with empathy. Yes, she will be one of the blossoms closest to your heart. A bond was forming between them in the quiet, sunlit room, a fragile bridge built of silk thread and shared stories of the mothers they loved. They spoke for hours. Lily talked about her father's profound grief and the immense pressure she felt to live up to her mother's memory. Anya spoke of her grandmother's resilience, of their journey to America, and of the fierce pride she felt in the heritage that lived in her hands. Around midday, Julian Croft entered the room, holding 2 mugs of tea. He placed one beside Anya, his movements careful so as not to disturb her. "How is it progressing?" he asked, his voice low. "She's incredible, Father," Lily said, her voice full of awe. "It's like watching magic happen." Julian watched Anya's hands as they moved with a speed and confidence that was mesmerizing. He wasn't a man given to flights of fancy, but Lily was right. It did look like magic. He saw the same intense focus his wife used to have when she was designing a new piece of software, a state of complete immersion where the outside world ceased to exist. "I was looking at the original part of the veil this morning," Anya said, her focus still on her work. "Under magnification, the craftsmanship is perfect. My grandmother told me to look for a specific detail. A signature." "A signature?" Julian asked, intrigued. "The weaver's knot," Anya said. "It was a secret of our family of artisans, a way to lock the final stitch of a major element. I found it at the base of the main floral cluster. My great-aunt did indeed make this veil." She finally looked up at him. "It feels like I am finishing her work, across 100 years." The simple, profound statement hung in the air. Julian felt a lump form in his throat. This young woman wasn't just repairing a piece of fabric. She was mending a tear in his family's history, reconnecting his daughter to a past that had been violently severed. Just then, the door swung open, and Eleanor Vance swept in, her presence immediately chilling the warm atmosphere in the room. "I came to see the disaster for myself," she announced, her eyes scanning the veil with a critical glare. She walked over to the frame, peering down at Anya's work. "It is passable, I suppose, for an imitation." "It's not an imitation, grandmother. It's a restoration," Lily said, her voice firm. "Do not take that tone with me, Lillian," Eleanor snapped. "You are being sentimental and naive. This girl has you all under her spell with her little stories. But I know how these things work. She will finish, your father will give her an absurd amount of money, and she will vanish. The authenticity of the veil will be forever compromised." "That's enough, Eleanor," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is it?" Eleanor challenged, turning on him. "You have always been so easily swayed by a compelling story. It's how you built your fortune, on vapor and promises. But this is not one of your tech startups. This is my family's legacy, and you are allowing a common waitress to defile it." Anya's hands stilled. The word defile struck her like a slap. All the warmth and purpose she had felt drained away, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. She felt small again, invisible, the servant girl from the restaurant. "Grandmother, stop it!" Lily cried, jumping to her feet. "You're being cruel. Anya is saving my wedding." She is performing a service for which she will be well paid, Eleanor said dismissively. And I, for one, intend to ensure the service is flawless. She leaned down, her face uncomfortably close to Anya's. I will be watching your every stitch, every single one. One mistake, one slip, and you will be out of this house so fast your head will spin. Do you understand me, Miss Petrova? Anya couldn't find her voice. She could only nod, her eyes fixed on the half-finished sunburst, the symbol of warmth and prosperity that now felt like a mockery. The magic was gone. The room was no longer a sanctuary. It was a pressure cooker, and Eleanor Vance had just turned up the heat. The next 24 hours were a blur of intense, nerve-wracking focus. Anya worked through the day and deep into the night, fueled by coffee and a stubborn refusal to let Eleanor Vance break her. The old woman was true to her word, sitting in her armchair like a hawk, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Julian and Lily provided a quiet, supportive buffer, but Eleanor's oppressive presence tainted everything. Finally, as the first pale light of the wedding day began to streak the sky, Anya knotted the last thread. It was done. She leaned back, her entire body aching, her eyes burning from lack of sleep, and looked at her work. It was seamless. The new panel blended perfectly with the old lace, the Serebriansky bridal blessing restored to its full, breathtaking glory. The silver-spun thread in the blessing stitch caught the dawn light, shimmering with a life of its own. A wave of profound relief and pride washed over her. She had done it. She had honored her ancestors, her grandmother, and Isabella Croft. Lily, who had slept for a few hours on a nearby sofa, awoke and came to see. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Anya, it's perfect. It's more than perfect. It's whole again. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she hugged Anya tightly. Thank you. I don't have the words to thank you. Julian, who had just entered with a fresh pot of coffee, stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the veil. A slow, wide smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile Anya had ever seen from him. Isabella, he whispered. She would be so proud, Lily. So proud of you both. The moment of triumph was shattered by Eleanor's voice, sharp and venomous. Don't celebrate just yet. She strode over to the veil, a small, powerful magnifying glass in her hand. She examined the work, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. She spent a long time scrutinizing the new panel, then the original work. A clever forgery, she finally declared, her voice ringing with triumph. Very clever, but you made one fatal mistake. What are you talking about, Mother Vance? Julian said, his smile vanishing. It's flawless. Is it? Eleanor's eyes glittered with malice. She turned to Anya. The original artisan, the true master from your little village, had a secret signature, didn't she? A mark of authenticity, known only to the Vance family, passed down with the veil. Anya's blood ran cold. A secret signature? Her grandmother had never mentioned one. Every true Serebriansky masterpiece, Eleanor continued, her voice booming in the quiet room, was marked with a single, tiny French knot made of pure gold thread, hidden amongst the petals of the centermost rose. It is nearly invisible to the naked eye. But it is not here. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Anya's work. Your copy lacks the master's mark. You are a fraud, a charlatan who learned a few fancy stitches and tried to pass them off as authentic. Julian and Lily stared at the veil, then at Anya, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Anya's mind raced. A gold knot? It made no sense. It was contrary to the entire philosophy of Serebriansky embroidery. where the skill of the stitch was the signature itself. "I knew it," Eleanor crowed, sensing victory. "I knew you were a fake. You preyed on my family's grief, on my granddaughter's sentimentality. You should be arrested for fraud." Anya felt the floor drop out from beneath her. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and now publicly humiliated. Eleanor's accusation was so specific, so confident it had to be true. She had failed. She had dishonored her family. She looked at Julian's face, at the doubt creeping into his eyes, and her heart broke. But then, through the fog of her exhaustion and fear, her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "The soul of the work is on the back, Agnieszka. The truth is always on the back." And she remembered the weaver's knot. Something clicked, a lie wrapped around a kernel of truth. Anya took a slow, steadying breath. She straightened her shoulders and looked not at Julian or Lily, but directly into Eleanor Vance's triumphant eyes. "With all due respect, Mrs. Vance," Anya said, her voice quiet but ringing with newfound clarity. "You are mistaken." "How dare you!" Eleanor shrieked. "Please let me finish," Anya said, her calm demeanor cutting through Eleanor's hysteria. "You are right that there is a secret signature. Your family was told it was a gold knot to satisfy a wealthy client's desire for a tangible mark of value. A story to make the piece feel even more exclusive. But the true Serebriansky artisans, my grandmother would say, would never use something so loud, so material. Our mark was one of skill, a secret whispered from one hand to another, not a shout of gold." She turned back to the veil, her movements now imbued with a serene, unshakable authority. "The signature is not a gold knot hidden on the front. It is the weaver's knot, the one I told you about, hidden on the back. But there is more to it, a secret within the secret that only a true practitioner would know." Using a pair of fine tweezers from her kit, her hand as steady as a surgeon's, she carefully turned over the edge of the centermost rose on the original part of the veil, the part her great-aunt had stitched a century ago. The back was a testament to mastery, a clean and perfect mirror of the front. "The weaver's knot is always the final knot on a masterpiece element," she explained, her voice soft but clear, filling the cavernous room. "And for a work of this magnitude, a bridal blessing, the artisan would use a special thread for that single locking knot. Not gold, something far more precious to our people." She gently probed the knot, and a tiny, almost invisible thread end came loose from the dense backing linen. She secured it in the tweezers and held it up. In the soft, indirect light of the dawn, it looked like nothing, a dull, grey piece of forgotten silk. A tense silence descended, thick and suffocating. Lily held her breath, her hands clasped at her chest. "Father," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The architect's lamp. The main one." Julian, moving as if in a trance, reached for the switch on the heavy lamp. He clicked it on. A beam of pure, bright, clinical light flooded the table. The instant the light struck the thread, the room gasped. It did not simply shine. It exploded with a brilliant, liquid, unmistakable silver shimmer, as if a fragment of a star had been caught in the tweezers. "The silver-spun silk," Julian breathed, the words a reverent prayer. "The resilience of our people," Anya said, her voice steady and sure, echoing the lesson from her grandmother's kitchen. "Something that looks plain, but holds a hidden light. The signature was never a gold knot. It was a single, hidden knot of silver. It represented the tear of joy you spoke of, Mr. Croft. It was a secret blessing from the artist to the bride, a piece of our soul woven into the fabric. It was never meant as a mark of ownership for the patron. Her hands moved with a fluid, irrefutable confidence now. She went to her own newly stitched panel, a perfect echo of the old. She turned over the identical centermost rows, and with the tweezers exposed the weaver's knot she herself had tied in the exhausted, pre-dawn hours. She pulled the thread end loose. She held the two tiny threads side by side in the jaws of the tweezers. The bright light caught them both, and they flashed with the same pure silver fire. A matched pair of captured stars, shining with a truth that spanned 100 years of silence. The silence that followed was of a different kind. It was not tense, but absolute, the kind of silence that follows a thunderclap. Eleanor Vance stared at the two shimmering threads, her face a mask of grey stone. The carefully constructed edifice of her authority, her heritage, her very identity, had been built on a lie, a condescending fable told to her ancestor, a story she had weaponized. And it had just been dismantled, not by wealth or power, but by the quiet, unassailable truth of the craft itself. Her face seemed to collapse inward, the bones of her aristocratic certainty turning to dust. She had been exposed not by Julian's new money or Lily's emotional pleading, but by the superior knowledge and unshakable integrity of the young woman she had sought to utterly destroy. Julian Croft looked from the incandescent threads to Anya's face, and the look in his eyes was one of profound, unreserved awe. He no longer saw a waitress, an immigrant girl, or a lucky hire. He saw an artist, a historian, a keeper of a sacred trust. He saw the same quiet strength, the same hidden, brilliant light that he had fallen in love with in his wife. Eleanor Vance made a small, choked sound, the only betrayal of the storm raging within her. For the first time in her 80 years of commanding rooms and controlling lives, she was utterly, comprehensively defeated. Without another word, without a glance at her son-in-law or granddaughter, she turned. She did not sweep from the room. She walked, her back unnaturally stiff, her steps measured, as if the very air had become thick and heavy, resisting her passage. The closing of the door was not a slam, but a soft, final click, the sound of a book closing on a long and bitter chapter. The wedding was an ethereal dream held in the sprawling gardens, with the bruised purple and soft gold of the Atlantic sunset as its backdrop. Lily was a vision, the restored veil cascading down her back, a river of mist and memory. As she walked the aisle, the Serebriansky panel caught the dying sun, and the hidden blessing stitch winked and flashed. A tiny captured star of joy passed from one woman's hands to another's heart. Anya watched from a discreet distance, seated not with the staff, but in a gilded guest chair, her grandmother beside her. Julian had insisted, sending his personal car to the brick building in Queens that morning. The driver had found Elena Petrova waiting on the stoop, dressed in her finest black dress and a hand-embroidered shawl of deep cobalt blue, a piece of Serebriansky royalty in her own right. Now she sat with her gnarled hands clasped in her lap, her sharp blue eyes shining with tears that mirrored the silver thread in the veil. During the reception, as a string quartet played Debussy and guests sipped champagne that cost more than their monthly rent, Julian Croft made his way to their table. He bypassed the polite greetings of other guests, his focus entirely on them. To the astonishment of the surrounding tables, the tech billionaire knelt beside Elena's chair, a gesture of profound respect that silenced the nearby conversations. "Mrs. Petrova," he said, his voice stripped of its usual corporate authority, filled instead with a raw, genuine gratitude. "Your granddaughter. She has given my family a gift that money can never measure. She did not just repair a veil. She restored a piece of our history, a piece of our heart. I know that this skill, this spirit, it comes from you. Thank you." Elena, for a moment, looked as though she might shatter. Then she reached out and patted his hand, her own trembling slightly. "She has a good heart and good hands. The thread remembers. It is the Serebriansky way." Julian then rose and turned to Anya. He looked at her for a long moment, truly seeing her. "What you did this morning, it was more than just proving a point. You had every reason to be intimidated, to back down. Eleanor, she can be a force of nature, but you held to the truth of your craft. That took more than skill. That took a kind of courage I rarely see, even in my own boardrooms." "I was just telling the truth of the thread," Anya said simply, uncomfortable with the praise. "The truth is the most powerful thing in the world," he agreed. He gestured to a quiet stone bench away from the music. "Will you walk with me for a moment? Both of you?" They sat overlooking the ocean, the salt spray cool on their faces. Julian didn't speak for a time, watching the waves crash against the shore. "I've spent the day thinking," he began, his voice low and contemplative. "Thinking about Isabella. She loved old things. Not for their value, but for their stories. She used to say that we live in a world obsessed with the next new thing, and we're letting the most beautiful parts of ourselves crumble into dust. This veil, it was a symbol of that for her. She despaired that the knowledge to make it was gone." He turned to them, his eyes intense. "A check feels insufficient. It feels insulting, frankly. What you and your grandmother possess is not a service to be bought. It's a living history, a legacy. It shouldn't be hidden away in a queen's apartment, waiting for a crisis to bring it into the light." He paused, gathering his thoughts, choosing his words with immense care. This was not a business proposition. It was something born from the day's raw emotion. "I am establishing a foundation in my wife's name. The Isabella Vance Croft Foundation for Artisanal Heritage. Its mission will be to find, fund, and preserve endangered crafts like yours. Not in a dusty museum, but in a living, breathing workshop. A place where masters can pass their skills to a new generation before they are lost forever." He looked at Elena, his expression full of reverence. "I want you, Mrs. Petrova, to be our first master-in-residence, our guiding star. We would provide a beautiful, comfortable apartment for you both, either here on the estate grounds or in the city, whatever you prefer. You would be a consultant, a storyteller, the soul of the foundation. We would offer a generous salary, of course, but more than that, we would offer a promise that your knowledge will not die with you." Elena was speechless, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a disbelief that transcended language. "And Anya," he continued, his gaze locking with hers, "I want you to be the Foundation's first executive director. You would build it. You would run the program, find other artisans, develop the curriculum, manage the grants. You would have a significant budget, a staff, and the complete freedom to shape it. You could stop waiting tables tomorrow. You could dedicate your life to this, to ensuring this light is never extinguished." The offer was staggering, a tectonic shift in the landscape of her life. It wasn't just money or a job, it was a purpose, a legacy, a world. Anya felt a dizzying vertigo, the roar of the ocean seeming to echo the tumult in her own head. She looked at her grandmother, whose face was a canvas of shock, hope, and a lifetime of prayer, suddenly, impossibly answered. "Sir, she stammered, the words catching in her throat. "I don't know the first thing about running a foundation. I know embroidery and how to balance 6 dinner plates on one arm. You know how to work harder than anyone I've ever met, Julian said firmly. You have an integrity that is shatterproof. You have a deep, authentic passion for the very thing we seek to preserve. I can hire accountants and lawyers to handle the paperwork. I cannot, for any price, hire what you are. He softened his tone. This won't be a handout. It will be the most demanding job you've ever had. We'd start small, a pilot program. There will be challenges, failures. But I believe in this mission. And after today, I believe in you more than I have believed in anyone in a very long time. He stood up, giving them space. You don't have to answer now. Talk it over. But please know that the offer is real. It will be waiting for you when you are ready. Later that evening, as the driver took them back across the bridge to Queens, the glittering lights of Manhattan seemed different to Anya. They were no longer the indifferent stars of a world she could only serve. They looked like a constellation of possibilities, a map to a new life. A director, Elena murmured into the quiet of the car, shaking her head in wonder. My Anyechka, a director. Can we do it, Babushka? Anya asked, the true, terrifying weight of the offer beginning to settle on her shoulders. It's so much. What if I fail? What if I disappoint him? Elena turned in her seat and took Anya's hands in her own. Her grip was surprisingly strong, the gnarled knuckles a testament to a life of resilience. We have faced machine guns and starvation. We have faced the erasure of our home and the scorn of a new country. We crossed an ocean with nothing but a box of threads and our memories. Building something beautiful? That is not a challenge to be feared, my child. That is a gift to be honored. The following weeks were a whirlwind of cautious, deliberate planning. Anya did not accept Julian's offer with blind gratitude. She met with him and his team of lawyers, her worn sneakers a stark contrast to their polished loafers. She asked sharp, practical questions about funding structures, long-term endowments, and mission statements. She insisted that the Foundation's primary goal must be to provide grants and support to artisans in their home countries, not just to bring them to New York as curiosities. She negotiated a contract for her grandmother that respected her age and health, with no strenuous demands, only the title and respect she had earned. Julian, far from being offended, was deeply impressed. He saw the same fierce intelligence and pragmatism in her that he valued in his best engineers. His belief in her solidified from a hopeful intuition into a concrete certainty. They didn't move to the Hamptons. They chose a spacious, light-filled apartment on the Upper West Side, with a small terrace where Eleanor could plant a garden of dill, parsley, and lavender. The day they moved out of the Queen's apartment was bittersweet. As Anya packed the last of their belongings, she ran her hand over the worn armchair where her grandmother had told her stories, the air still thick with the ghost scent of borscht and dill. It was a home built of survival. Their new life would have to be built of something more. The Foundation's first home was not a sterile office building, but a converted loft space in Brooklyn's Dumbo neighborhood, with wide plank floors, exposed brick, and huge arched windows that flooded the room with light and offered a breathtaking view of the Manhattan Bridge. For the first month, it was just Anya, an empty room, a laptop, and a telephone. There were days she felt like a complete imposter, overwhelmed by spreadsheets and legal documents, missing the simple, exhausting anonymity of waiting tables. The silence of the huge loft was deafening. But then, slowly, the silence began to be filled. The first victory was finding a master woodcarver from Appalachia, a man whose family had been carving intricate songbirds for 200 years and was about to give up the craft for lack of interest. The Foundation provided him with a grant to take on 3 young apprentices. A few weeks later, they funded a collective of weavers in the highlands of Peru, allowing them to purchase the rare alpaca wool needed to continue their ancient traditions. One crisp autumn evening, 6 months after the wedding, Anya stood at the window of the workshop, looking out at the city skyline. The space behind her was no longer silent. It was filled with the quiet, sacred hum of creation. Her grandmother, seated in a comfortable chair under a warm lamp, was demonstrating the subtle art of spinning silver into silk for a small, captivated group of textile students from Pratt. In one corner, the Appalachian woodcarver, their first artisan in residence, was showing a young man from the Bronx how to feel the grain of a piece of maple. The Isabella Vance Croft Foundation was no longer just an idea. It was a real, breathing entity, a small but powerful beacon for traditions that had been hidden in the shadows. Julian Croft stopped by, as he often did, arriving without fanfare. He no longer looked like a grieving titan of industry. The shadow in his eyes had receded, replaced by a quiet purpose. He stood beside Anya, following her gaze out the window. Isabella would have loved this place, he said softly. The noise, the smell of the wood and the wool, the feeling that something real, something with a soul, is being made here. We're getting there, Anya said, a tired but deeply contented smile on her face. It's slow work. The best things are, he replied, the things that are meant to last. He looked at her, at the quiet confidence she now wore as comfortably as a second skin. I never got to properly thank you for what you did for Eleanor. Anya looked at him, surprised. For Eleanor? By telling the truth, you broke something in her, he said, but you also set her free from a lie she'd spent her life defending. She's different now, quieter. She started asking Lily to tell her stories about Isabella. Real stories. It's a start. Anya absorbed this, a quiet sense of closure settling over her. Her victory had not been an act of destruction, but one of clarification, its ripples spreading in ways she never could have imagined. She looked down at her own hands. They were no longer the soft, anonymous hands of a waitress. They were stained with indigo dye from a recent workshop, pricked by needles and dusted with the fine powder of cedarwood. They were the hands of a director, a teacher, a curator of memories. They were her grandmother's hands, her great-aunt's hands, the hands of a long line of women who knew the magic of the thread. And they were busy, not just mending the heirlooms of the rich, but weaving a new tapestry altogether, one of hope and history and hidden light, one perfect, authentic stitch at a time.